Welcome to another instance of Data for God. It is my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce to you guys two people. That is Taylor and Chesaney Coy. Guys, welcome so much to the series.
Thanks for having us.
No problem at all. No problem at all. To give you guys at home a little bit of background on Taylor and Chesaney, they got a special place in my heart, but let me give you a little background first. So Taylor and Chesaney are both from Michigan, opposite sides of the state, if I remember correctly. Taylor originally went to undergrad at Grand Valley State, Chesaney at Saginaw State, if I remember, or Saginaw Valley State. There we go. There's valleys everywhere, apparently, in Michigan. And so, but they did not meet up in Michigan. They met for the first time down at North Carolina State University at the Master of Science in Analytics program, where they both ended up graduating and happened to have me as a professor. Now, that's not why they have a special place in my heart. I've graduated, 1,200 alumni at this point? You guys are the only pair of alumni I actually performed your wedding. So that, I think you guys hold a special place there. No one else can really say that. And that's not an advertisement. This was a special thing for these two. Chesaney's like a daughter to me. And Taylor, you're kind of like now an adopted son. Welcome to the family. It's all good. It's all good. So, again, welcome, guys. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you guys about sort of your faith journey and your careers and just sort of walk through that. But that gives just a brief little overview from my end. But again, this is also the first time I've ever interviewed a married couple, so this should get interesting as we go as well. Tell me a little bit about yourselves and really the collective story that you guys have.
I think this is where they say ladies first.
Very polite of you. I appreciate that.
This is where communication is really important in marriage. Because I thought Taylor was
Marriage
starting.
lesson 1, communication.
Yes. So, anyways, I am Chesaney, as you introduce us. Mm-hmm. And we collectively have a very awesome story. I'm probably a little bit biased, but it's been cool as Taylor and I always go back and reflect on our story and kind of what led us to NC State, where we met. I had a really good family friend who was a mentor to me and saw that I was interested in data as I was studying business in undergrad, pointed me to the program. That was kind of my one and only plan. So thankfully, I was accepted to the program by some miracle. And that's where I met Taylor. I spent some time figuring out what I wanted to do in undergrad. So I actually ran over by a month. I graduated a month later than I would have needed to get into the cohort before ours at NC State. So that's kind of cool to see God working and just delaying me a year so that I could meet Taylor there.
And then kind of on the opposite side of that story, when I was applying for grad school, I had applied for like 10 or 12 schools and I had not even heard of North Carolina State. And I luckily had a professor at Grand Valley who was close with a student who went to the IAA a few years before we did, got us connected, learned about the program, met some of the faculty, and it was a done deal at that point once I started learning more about the program. And kind of as Chess iterated too, like it's awesome looking back now and seeing God kind of woven throughout our story. Chess mentioned that she kind of did a bunch of different things in undergrad and kind of pushed her a year back. I was very set kind of from the beginning that I always loved math, loved numbers. So I knew I wanted to go in that direction. So I actually had the ability to finish college in 3 years. So I actually did it a year earlier. And like Chess said, just to see how the timeline lined up for both of us to get into the same cohort at the same time and to meet each other is just, it's a really cool thing to look back on.
It's amazing the plan that God has set, that when we look back on things, we're like, oh, I kind of see what you're doing there. Huh. Oh, we would never have come up with these grand plans ourselves. Like, that's the best part about all of it. That's the best part about all of it. That's an awesome story. That's an awesome story. And you both joined the Bible study while you were there. You ended up meeting. Next thing leads to another. I somehow become an ordained minister, and I'm up in Michigan marrying the two of you. It's a fun story. I love it. I love it. Perfect. All right. Now, some people seem surprised when I tell them I'm a Christian and work with data, math, statistics, all of that stuff. How do you all connect the idea of God and really just the idea of data in general?
I will let you start this time, Taylor.
All right. So I think one of the things that's really interesting, and we talked about it in our Bible study a few weeks ago, which I think the timing is really interesting of this. I think God, and some people might disagree, I think God really likes numbers. And one of the examples is there's a lot of intentionality in the Bible when you look at some of the stories that go on there. And so, for example, I'll pull out the number 40, for example.
Yes.
If we look at the Israelites wandering in the desert, they wandered for 40 years. We look at when the world was flooded and Noah was in the ark. He was in the ark for 40 days. And then when we have Jesus come along and he's tempted in the wilderness with the devil, he was there for 40 days and 40 nights. And so, and there's many other examples like that. So I think there's nice little clues in the Bible that God is really big into numbers and data.
Yes. I like that. That's good. You're right. You're right.
Another thing that we talked about too is that numbers have the ability to portray a really powerful message. The story that we often talk about is when Jesus feeds the 5,000.
Yeah.
And he did this with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And that sounds a whole lot more powerful than saying something along the lines of Jesus fed a lot of people with a little food. So having those numbers to get really specific and just really drive home the message. So with data, we have the ability to do the same. We can speak truth and we can inspire others with it as well.
No, I love both of those examples you guys gave, right? I think it's some of those things that God's got all of this sort of worked out. And to me, sometimes data almost feels like God just letting us in a little bit on the secret, right? It's like, here's the underweaving pattern that's going on. I mean, I knew about it the whole time, but, I'll let you guys take a look at it sometimes too. Awesome, awesome. So there are a lot of great Christian organizations and churches out there, but God calls us to represent him really wherever he calls us to be. Now, Taylor, I know you work sort of as a data person at iPipeline, almost like an internal consultant. Chesaney, you work at Elder Research as more of an external consultant, I guess, if you want. So how do you guys connect your careers to your faith?
I think a lot of it comes down to what you said, like God can use us wherever we're at. So being able to show up for God, work as if we're working for the Lord every day when we show up for work, and then having the ability to be a light to our coworkers as well. We don't know what they're going through. We don't know what their situation is, but we have a very awesome period of 8 hours every day where we can be a light to them and encourage them wherever they are at.
One of the amazing things that we've learned in Tennessee is we've come across an amazing family that has a beautiful background, and they've been missionaries in Cambodia for a majority of their lives. Awesome. And I think sometimes Chess and I can get caught up in, oh my goodness, look what they're doing, and look what they're going out there and doing, and look at us and look what we're doing. And I think we get caught up in that sometimes, and then we got to kind of reorient our focus to say, well, wait a second. What if every single person went out into the missionary field to do that kind of work? Well, if that was the case, then what's going to happen kind of on our own soil and within all the jobs we're at daily? How many people would go untouched? And so like Chess said, being able to where we're work and where God can use us to shine that light to coworkers. And I think this is especially true when you look at like the remote environment where it can be a lot harder to connect with your coworkers. And so just little things, one of the habits that I've liked to get into is if a coworker says something about an event, putting like a calendar reminder at like 6 a.m. the day of, so I can follow up and say, hey, how did this thing go? And just trying to make those little connections and really the ability to, even if it's small things, maybe plant seeds with coworkers.
No, I love that. You're right. I mean, I love that analogy there, Taylor, about the planting of seeds, right? God calls us into the mission field, but the mission field doesn't have to be overseas, right? Like, I hear it a lot of times. Sometimes God calls people to go, and sometimes God calls people to send others to go. But in reality, he calls all of us to go every single day. the second we step out that door, we are missionaries carrying his word to wherever we go. And you're exactly right. In this remote world, it makes it even harder to be able to do that. I love that intentionality. And you're exactly right, Chess, is that notion of still trying to be able to build those things and connect everything still together. It's still important. And it's something that I think we all have to remember. And it's not easy, right? Like it'd be nice to be able to sit there and say sometimes, I think, now again, I have friends who are missionaries too. I felt the same way. It's like, man, you guys are traveling around the world going and spreading the word. And, there are times I've talked to my friend and he's like, man, you have it so easy. All you got to do is just go to work and you can just talk to people about God where you work. I'm like, man, you got it so easy. Like people expect you to talk to them about God where you're going, so like it's always grass is always greener situation. So I like that. Now, working with clients can be demanding, right? Whether they're internal clients, whether they're external clients, just working with clients in general can just be a demanding thing. One challenge I had back when I was a consultant was using work as an idol. Basically, I know one challenge that we've talked about, separately is just an idea about, in the past, this notion of work-life balance. How do you both sort of balance that work and life thing that everyone always tries to figure out?
And I can take this one because I've had kind of two different experiences now, having been at two different companies with very, very different cultures. Like you said, with clients being demanding, that's one end of the spectrum. But then you also have the impact of your coworkers around you being demanding or having work as an idol. And that's kind of what their lives revolve around. And it's really a sad thing, honestly. It's really easy to get sucked into that culture, and it takes a lot to push back on it, even when you're uncomfortable with it. Like a lot of the times at my former company, I was very uncomfortable with the hours that I was working. I didn't feel like I really had the bandwidth to give my all outside of work. And even with that, I still worked the hours. I knew that this wasn't what I should be doing, but I still did it because there's a lot of pressure on it, and it takes a lot of willpower to push back on that. It got really bad towards the end of my time at my former company too. It seemed like all the conversations with Taylor were just complaining about work instead of just really enjoying time together. And then when I was baptized, which you were both there for, which was amazing, I worked until pretty much the second that I had to leave for that. And that didn't really give me the time to pull away from work and connect with God and really have that be a powerful thing. Afterwards, and sharing with Taylor's mom that I was baptized, she asked if I cried because she was saying how she cried and it was such a powerful thing. And it's sad, but I was kind of numb to it. It wasn't the powerful and deep emotional experience that I wanted it to be and I expected it to be. So it's realizing all of that is very sad now, but it's a really great learning experience because now I know that value of having a work-life balance and setting those boundaries so that when I step away from work, I can give my all to God. I can give my all to Taylor. I can give my all to my family, my friends, our neighbors.
Awesome. Now that's a great testimony to be able to say. You're exactly right. It's a tough thing. It really, really is. And sometimes we learn tough lessons to be able to help us learn those things. So you're exactly right. And you kind of hinted at this a little bit already. So how do you sort of connect this back to your faith? Like you were talking about, it sort of gives you that better chance to be able to connect. But tell me a little bit more about sort of this separation of, we talked about how do you sort of connect your faith to your career, but then how do you also separate some things so that you actually have the ability to have that balance? Like, and how do you tie faith into that?
So I can take this one because Chess, you got the last one. So I think this one kind of relates back to the idea of spiritual warfare. We know that our enemy can be very deceiving and very tricky. Yeah. And so I think we can point and we can look at things out there and say, oh, alcoholism or drug abuse or abusive relationships. That's some really bad stuff. But if I choose to work 80 hours a week and kind of put my family on the back burner. Well, it's easy to say I'm working really hard. I'm doing the right things. I'm trying to work this job so I can support the family. So I'm doing this for them. And so it's really easy with something like that, the kind of work-life balance, to really look at it with a positive light and say, you know, this isn't a bad thing. This isn't, there's worse things out there. I can't remember what church we were at, but the pastor just had this put it really well. And it was the idea that no matter what we think of something that we might be in the middle, whether it's drug abuse, whether it's this work-life balance, anything that comes in between you and God is an idol. Yeah. And you can treat it that just like what we read about in the Old Testament, where they would create these figures and worship them. In essence, if something is taking over your life and it's coming between you and God, even though we might not be bowing down to it, it's, in a sense, it's an idol in our lives, and it's stealing some of our attention away that we should be giving to our Creator.
No, you're exactly right. That's a great way of putting it, right? Like we don't build the wooden statues, but in essence, we still bow down to our careers. We still bow down to salary and trying to get advancement and more power and more recognition. And we essentially almost put ourselves on that idol and in that pedestal, you know? So you're exactly right. It's a battle that all of us have to face. And I've heard those same things. You're exactly right, Joe. This isn't for me. It's for my family. It's like, really? Because, and I've told you guys this before too, I remember when I was misbalancing my life and when my idol was work, I remember my son saying to me when I was home one of the few times from traveling, "Daddy, can you come back over and play sometime?" And that hurt. And it was one of those situations, right? Like you said, I was telling myself I was doing it for him, right? It's like, no, buddy, this is for you. But it's like, no, it's not. Because to him, me being there was what he wanted. He didn't want, financial security 30 years from now. He wanted Daddy and Andrew time, right? So like, yeah, I'm with you. It's so easy to convince yourself of these things. It really, really is. It really is. All right, so enough of talking of the struggles that we have with sort of work and faith. What's one big blessing you guys have had in your career when connecting your work and faith?
I would say the biggest blessing for me is just seeing God's presence throughout the journey, kind of like how Taylor and I are able to look back on our story and seeing, God really had a plan behind here, and it's this crazy, beautiful story. So when I started out at NC State, I had this big, grand idea that there are these lakes over in Charlotte. It seems like a really cool area. So I'm gonna start the program. I'm gonna get a job in Charlotte, and that's where I'm gonna be. That's what's gonna happen. And so it happened. Mm-hmm. That was the one job offer that I had on the table when every other company that I was interviewing with went into a hiring freeze. And that was the point where I had decided, I don't really know if I want to be in Charlotte. I want to stay in Raleigh. I don't want this time in grad school to end because it's so fun. So I'm just going to stay in Raleigh and find a job here. And it didn't happen. God answered my prayer to get a job in Charlotte and move there. And so it's, even though that's not what I necessarily wanted then at that moment, God was answering my prayers. So I knew he was present and there was a purpose for it. And that's something, Eric, you and I both discussed as I was weighing, do I accept this offer? Do I not?
Yeah.
And the company that I actually really wanted to be with and stood out the most in grad school was Elder Research. And just seeing my experience at my former company and how that shaped me to become the best employee that I could be at Elder Research now. So seeing kind of everything come full circle and God having a plan throughout that, and then really guiding me through my hopes and ambitions career-wise.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I forgot about that. I remember now. You're right. It's like, oh, I am so going to Charlotte. It's like, okay. I mean, you asked, right? Like, and in the end, it was the best thing for you at that moment because that's what you needed at that moment to sort of help you learn what you really actually wanted. And now look where you are. Funny how it all comes around like that.
It is funny how God answers prayers.
Exactly. Taylor, how about you?
So just way too many blessings to even begin to list. So I'll keep it to one. But I was very fortunate out of grad school that the first job I had, I thoroughly enjoyed. I was working with Kevin from the program, and just fantastic relationship with him. Loved our team, loved the work we were doing. We were in a really cool space. We were in the defense contracting space, and so we were working on some really cool projects. Unfortunately, that can come with some problems. We had a little bit of change of leadership.
Yep.
Things went downhill a little bit, and so I knew I needed to get out of there. And so I was coming from a job I really liked, and so this was actually at the same time that we were moving to Tennessee and trying to secure our first house together. And so I was applying for a lot of jobs, trying to make sure if my company wasn't okay with me going remote, that I had a backup, so hopefully our loan wouldn't fall through. And I got to the point where I kind of had to make a decision, and I was working with a couple different companies, and actually I had 3 offers up at once. And Chess can attest to this. Every spare second we had that week, because I had a deadline for a week to make the decision, was talking about the pros and cons of each and every job. And I remember there were some nights where I just would call a few people from our church and just say, hey, can we pray together tonight? Because my internal prayer the whole time was, God, just point me to the one that you want me to go to. Don't make me think, don't make me struggle. Just give me the answer with where you want to go. And I think in just the kind of hecticness of that week, and not necessarily feeling like I had a clear answer from God, but kind of feeling like his message to me was, you go and I will use you wherever you go. And so from those 3 jobs, it was a really tough decision, and made my choice. And with switching to the new job with iPipeline and accepting that offer, in all reality, in the first 1 or 2 months, I was a little disappointed. I was kind of hoping to ramp up faster, and things were really slow. And, I had a lot of doubts, and I said, God, what's going on here? You told me you were going to kind of help me through this, and I feel like I made the wrong choice, and where are you in this situation? And one of the other offers that I had was to actually work with some of my former teammates on a new project. And so I actually had called Kevin that night, and he was kind of giving me updates. And the project that I was going to get hired on for, even no matter what the client promised, they didn't sign up for another contract. And so the project got completely dropped, and they were kind of looking to fill and get onto different projects and kind of scrambling. And it was kind of like this internal voice and looking up at the sky and saying, okay, God, all right, I trust you. I can see. And it's like from that moment, and I don't know if it was the placebo effect or not, things turned around with iPipeline, started getting into the workload, had some bandwidth to work with teammates and to learn about the system and the tools, and to get into some really cool projects. And so at least recently, that's been just one of the biggest blessings, and really cool to see how God moved throughout that situation, even though during that situation, I was not always his biggest fan.
Understand how that goes. And Chess and I can joke about this. Are we surprised that Taylor had a pros and cons list? No, not one bit at all.
He had that for me too.
Awesome. Well, guys, as we finish up this interview, what are some things we can pray for you about?
Whenever we get this request, kind of the big thing for us right now is we felt very called to Morristown, Tennessee. And as we've been here, we've been really struggling to find our community, find a church. We've been here for over a year now. So it's kind of the point where we figured we would have an established community and our home church. And so it definitely feels like a piece of us is missing, and we're just trying to figure out, is there somewhere that God is calling us next, or what is his purpose for us here? So just praying through that situation that he can guide us wherever he needs us to go.
Definitely will. That's no problem at all. And you know what? Thank you both for still looking, right? You could easily have just given up and said, you know what? We don't need church. We just don't need community, but the fact that you still are appreciative of the value of community and still trying to be able to look, that's a great thing. It's a great encouragement. It really is.
where we were at in Fayetteville, we kind of had our dream church and our dream community.
Yeah.
And I think now not having that makes us appreciate it so much more than when we were there and in the moment. So I think honestly, stepping away from it and seeing what life looks like without it has just been all the more reason to say we need to find this.
So sometimes being in the wilderness can help you realize what's like in the promised land, right? And so it's definitely a need, and we will definitely be praying for you guys about that.
Thank you.
You guys don't even know. This is just such a blessing. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. It's so good catching up with the both of you. Thank you again.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, no
yes,
problem.
Thank you. It's
Sure
been so fun.
Yes, us. Inside joke for those who may not know. But either way, thank you so much for watching at home. It's an absolute pleasure. Take care and God bless.